10 out of 10. That is the highest severity score any vulnerability can be given, and in December of 2021, one flaw earned exactly that. It lived inside a tiny piece of software called Log4j, a logging library so ordinary that almost nobody had ever heard its name, and it was quietly running on hundreds of millions of machines at once. Here is the part that carries the whole episode. When the flaw went public, there was no patch, none. The entire internet learned about the hole and learned it had no fix in the very same breath, and for a while the only people who could act on it were the attackers. There is one exam word for that exact situation, and by the end of this you will never confuse it with anything else on the list.
That word is 0 day, and this is Professor Erica. The definition the exam wants is precise, so hold it exactly. A 0 day is a vulnerability that is unknown to the vendor, or one that has no patch available yet, which means the defenders have 0 days to prepare before it gets used against them. Today we walk all of Objective 2.3, the full menu of vulnerability types you can be tested on.
Hey everyone, Kai here, and I want to put a number on why this one shook the whole industry. Log4j was not some rare product. It was a free component buried inside thousands of other applications, the kind of thing a developer pulls in without a second thought. So when the flaw dropped, every team on Earth woke up to the same terrifying question. Are we even running it? And honestly, most of them did not know.
Hi all, I'm Kim, and the official record names this flaw with total precision. The National Vulnerability Database tracks it as CVE 2021-44228. It carries that 10.0 base score. Its nickname is Log4Shell, and the weakness type is remote code execution, which the exam considers the worst category there is. Remote code execution means an attacker sitting anywhere on the planet gets to run their own commands on your server. Not just read a file, not just crash it, run anything they choose, as if they had walked up and sat down at the keyboard themselves.
And the trigger was almost insultingly small. This flaw had hidden in the code since 2013 and nobody noticed because activating it looked harmless. Log4j had a feature where, if you logged a specially formatted string, it would reach across the network and fetch code to run. So an attacker just typed that string into anything the app might record. A username box, a chat message, even the name of their own phone.
Sit with how absurd that is for a second. You did not have to break in. One crafted string dropped into any field the app logged, and the logging tool itself would dial the attacker back and run whatever code it was handed. And that flaw had been resting quietly inside the source since 2013. 8 years of hiding before the world finally noticed.
Now here is the shape of a 0 day that the exam actually loves because it explains the whole panic. Let me walk you through the life cycle of a flaw because the danger is not one single moment, it is a gap called the exploit window. Watch the timeline as I lay it out.
First, a flaw is born, written into the code, often years before anyone knows. Then someone discovers it. Then it gets disclosed to the public. Then, hopefully, a patch is released, and finally you actually deploy that patch. The problem is that the attackers often discover it and exploit it long before the patch ever exists.
That dangerous stretch between disclosure and a deployed patch is the exploit window, and a true 0 day means exploitation started before there was any patch at all. The window opened while defenders were still asleep. Everything else on today's list is a race to shrink that window, and Log4Shell is what happens when it swings wide open.
And we can pull the actual record up, because the official government page is where every defender starts. The score, the affected versions, the full description, it is all sitting right there in black and white on the database.
And read the entry and you see the 3 things the exam keeps returning to. The CVE identifier, the unique name for this one flaw. The CVSS score, that 10.0 severity. And the note that it is being actively exploited in the wild. Stick with me, because those exact 3 pieces decide our whole debate later on what you patch first.
So that is 0 day, the dramatic headliner. But here is the open loop I want you holding on to. 0 days grab every headline, yet they are not what actually breaks most companies. The vulnerability that does the most real damage is far more boring, and you have very likely created one yourself without realizing it. Kim, you have been sitting on the one question everybody asks about this. Go ahead and put it to them.
Yes, and it is the question that frames this whole episode. It shows up under nearly every video on this topic. People ask, if a 0-day means nobody has a patch, then how am I supposed to defend against something that literally cannot be patched yet?
Brilliant question, and the short answer is depth. You assume some flaw is always unknown, so you stack controls that limit the damage when one fires. Segmentation, least privilege, constant monitoring. Recognizing the type is step one, and building that depth is where the whole series is headed.
And that is our bridge. We have met the famous vulnerability. Before we meet the common one, let us step back and see the entire map, every family on this objective, so you know exactly what the exam can ask.
"11 families. That is how many vulnerability types Objective 2.3 expects you to recognize, and thrown at you as a flat list they blur together into an impossible pile of memorization. So we are not going to memorize a list. We are going to build a map, and the map is one simple idea.
The idea is that every vulnerability has an address. Where the flaw actually lives tells you which family it belongs to. Once you can locate a flaw, naming it becomes almost automatic, and the exam scenario stops being a guessing game.
Let me draw the whole thing out, because seeing it as a branching tree is what makes it stick. Follow along as it grows from the top down, one branch at a time. Top branch is the software itself, a flaw in your own application code, a flaw in the operating system underneath it, a flaw in a web page it serves, or a flaw in the encryption it relies on. All of those live inside the software you run.
The middle branch is the platform your software sits on. The virtual machines and the hypervisor that host it, the cloud services that surround it, and the physical hardware and firmware right at the bottom. These are flaws in the ground your app is standing on, not the app itself.
And the last branch is the one people forget, because it is not really about code at all. It is about trust and people. A setting a human configured wrong. A supplier whose flaw you inherited. A phone whose owner stripped its own protections. The weakness there is a decision, not a bug.
So where does 0-day fit on this tree? And the honest answer is that it does not sit on any single branch, and that trips people up constantly.
Right, because 0-day is not a location, it is a clock. Any flaw on any branch becomes a 0-day the moment it is exploited before a patch exists. Log4Shell was a software flaw that was also a 0-day. The two labels stack. Keep location and timing in separate mental columns and the exam gets a lot easier.
This is exactly where a triage question came in from the community, and it is the perfect one to phone a specialist for. Someone who lives inside this map every day. Luis, you lined up the call?
I did. The question we kept getting is whether a working defender actually thinks in these families, or whether that is just an exam thing. So I have got an analyst on the line who triages these for a living. Let us bring them in.
Happy to be here. And yes, the families are not just exam trivia. They are the first cut we make on any new report. The very first thing I ask is where the flaw lives, because that decides who even owns the fix. A cloud misconfiguration goes to a completely different team than a flaw in our own application code.
That is a great point about ownership. So when a brand new 0-day breaks, like the morning Log4Shell dropped, what is the honest first hour actually like for your team?
The first hour is not patching because there is nothing to patch. The first hour is inventory. We race to answer one question: are we even running the vulnerable thing and where? That Log4j morning, most teams could not answer that fast. And the panic was mostly about not knowing your own footprint. Knowing what you run is the real superpower.
So if you had to give one piece of advice to someone studying this list right now, what makes it click for real teams?
Stop treating them as vocabulary and start treating them as addresses. When a scenario describes a flaw, locate it first and the name falls out. And remember that the boring families, misconfiguration especially, are where the real breaches live. The exotic 0 day is rare, the open door is Tuesday.
The open door is Tuesday. Thank you, that is the perfect handoff, and we owe you one. Let us go stand in that open doorway right now, because it is the single most common vulnerability there is, and I promise you have made this exact mistake. Let me pause for just a second, because this genuinely helps. If you are getting value here, hit that like button, then subscribe and ring the bell. It costs you nothing, and it is the single biggest thing that keeps these videos coming.
Misconfiguration. That is the boring word for the vulnerability that quietly causes more breaches than any 0 day ever has. It is not a bug in the code. It is a setting left wrong, a permission left too loose, a default that nobody ever bothered to change.
And the exam wants you to understand why it dominates the real world. A 0 day requires an attacker to discover a brand new flaw, which is genuinely hard. A misconfiguration requires nothing at all. The hole is already open, often facing the public internet, just waiting for anyone to stroll through. No exploit, no skill, no patch to dodge.
Let me make this concrete with the classic case because there is a lab-safe version anyone can follow. Cloud storage buckets. Amazon calls them S3. They are private by default, but one careless click or one bad line in a deployment script quietly flips them to public.
I want to show you what that looks like from an attacker's chair in an isolated lab that I fully control. No real victim here, just a bucket I deliberately misconfigured to demonstrate the mechanics. Watch how little it actually takes to read private data when one permission is wrong. Look hard at that flag, no sign request. That means I am not logged in at all. I am an anonymous stranger on the open internet, and the bucket is cheerfully listing payroll files and a full database dump. The misconfiguration is nothing more than the words public read where it should have said private.
And pulling a file down is just as trivial. There is no clever payload here, no injection, no cracking. It is the cloud equivalent of leaving your filing cabinet on the sidewalk with a sign that says help yourself. One command, and the whole database walks away.
Now hold that image because it is almost exactly how Capital One lost the data of 106 million people in 2019. The exam loves this case because it chains two of our families together. A web application firewall was misconfigured, and an attacker used a flaw called server-side request forgery to abuse it. The attacker tricked that firewall into asking the cloud for its own secret credentials, then used those credentials to read the storage. The flaw was the way in, but the misconfiguration, the over-permissive role, and the loose settings is what turned a small foothold into a full catastrophe. One careless setting cost a bank a fortune and a generation of trust.
There is a second kind of misconfiguration the exam likes and developers create it constantly, an exposed .git folder. When you build a website, your source code lives in a hidden folder called .git. If the web server accidentally serves that folder to the public, an attacker can download your entire codebase.
And this one genuinely makes me wince because it is everywhere. Watch. An attacker fuzzes for the folder, sees the server respond, and pulls down the whole repository with an off-the-shelf tool. Every line of your code, every secret you ever committed, every password you thought you had deleted.
Look at that final line. It recovered a file called .env. That is exactly where developers stash database passwords and API keys. The attacker now holds the source code and the keys together, all because one hidden folder was served to the public. The fix is a single server rule, but the damage from forgetting it is total.
So here's the honest verdict the exam rewards. When a scenario describes data exposed with no clever attack, no malware, no injection, just a setting that was simply wrong, the answer is misconfiguration. It is the most common family precisely because it is the easiest mistake to make and the easiest one to overlook. And Kim, this is where the community always jumps in, so bring us the question they keep asking.
Right, and it is the honest one everybody wants answered under these clips. People want to know honestly, how do I check whether I have done this to myself right now, today?
2 5-minute checks, and we will spell them out fully at the end so you can do them tonight. Open your cloud storage permissions and confirm nothing is public that should be private. Then add /.git/config to a site you run and make sure it returns nothing. That is it.
Perfect. And we will hold you to those 2 tonight. Misconfiguration is the human error of this whole field. Now let us look at a family where the technology itself, not the human, opens the door. The walls we build between systems, and what happens when an attacker punches through one.
Almost everything you touch online runs on virtualization. Many separate virtual machines share one physical server, and each one is supposedly sealed off from its neighbors. That wall of separation is the entire promise of the cloud, and Objective 2.3 names 2 distinct ways that wall fails.
The first and most serious is VM escape. Picture a building where every tenant has a sealed apartment and one manager, the hypervisor, controls the whole building. A VM escape is when an attacker inside one apartment finds a crack, tunnels through the wall, and reaches that manager. From there, they can touch every other apartment in the building.
And the exam wants the direction crystal clear. A VM escape goes from the guest, the individual virtual machine, outward to the host or the hypervisor. That is what makes it so feared. In a shared cloud, one tenant escaping their box could mean access to dozens of unrelated companies running on the very same hardware.
The second virtualization flaw is subtler, and the exam adores subtle resource reuse. When your virtual machine hands back memory or storage, the system is supposed to wipe it clean before giving it to the next tenant. Resource reuse is when it simply forgets, so the next person finds fragments of your data still sitting there.
Think of it as a hotel room cleaned badly. You check out, the next guest checks in, and your private papers are still in the desk drawer. Nobody attacked anything at all. The system just failed to clear a shared resource between users, and confidential data leaked from one tenant to another.
Let me put these 2 side by side, because the exam will hand you a scenario and ask which one it is. The clean test is 1 word each: direction versus leftovers. Watch the board.
So when a question says an attacker broke out of their virtual machine to control the host, that is VM escape. When it says one customer could read another customer's leftover data, that is resource reuse. Direction versus leftovers. The single distinction is your whole decision.
Both of those sit under the wider heading of cloud-specific vulnerabilities, which the exam lists in its own right. The cloud adds risks on-premises systems never had, like the shared responsibility model, where you and the provider each secure a different layer. If you assume they cover your part, you leave it wide open. Capital One assumed the cloud secured the storage, but it never secured their permissions.
Now shift from the software walls down to the physical world, because hardware carries its own family on the exam. The first is firmware, the low-level code baked right into a device. The router, the hard drive, the webcam. It is software, so it has bugs, but people almost never update it. A flaw in firmware can even survive a full reinstall of the operating system.
And the 2 that trip everyone up are end of life and legacy. End of life means the vendor has officially stopped supporting the product, so no more patches will ever arrive, and every future flaw becomes a permanent 0 day with no fix on the way. Many of those unfixable flaws land on a government list of vulnerabilities confirmed under active attack. This is the CISA Known Exploited Vulnerabilities Catalog, the KEV, and it is the exact list our debate turns on in a minute. Every entry here is confirmed to be exploited in the wild right now. An end-of-life system is a factory for future entries on this page.
Legacy is the gentler cousin. It just means an old system still running, often because some critical business process depends on it, and unlike end of life, it may actually still be getting patched. The gap between those 2 words is precisely what the exam tests. Legacy is about age. End of life is about support.
There is one more family to name here before we move on, and it deserves a real face because it is the one people underestimate: cryptographic vulnerabilities. This is when the encryption you trusted is weak or broken. And the most famous example in history has an actual logo. Let me show you.
This is Heartbleed. In 2014, a flaw in OpenEA SSL, the encryption library that guards a huge share of the internet, let an attacker quietly read chunks of a server's private memory, including the secret keys that protect every connection. The record is CVE 2014-0160, and it scored a 7.5.
And notice the lesson hiding in that score. Heartbleed sat at a 7.5, not a perfect 10 like Log4Shell, yet it forced half the internet to reissue their keys and passwords. A cryptographic flaw does not have to be a 10 to be a genuine emergency, because the thing it breaks, trust in the lock itself, sits underneath everything else you built.
That is a beautiful bridge, Erica, because it lands us on the hardest decision in this entire field. Heartbleed was a 7.5, Log4Shell was a 10. On a real network, you face thousands of open flaws at once, and you cannot fix them all today. So which do you touch first? That is a genuine fight, and we are going to have it right now. Here is a fight real security teams have every single week, and the exam tests exactly how you resolve it. You have just met a dozen vulnerability families, and on any real network there are thousands of open ones at once. You physically cannot patch them all today, so the question on the table is sharp and unavoidable. When the list is endless, what do you fix first? Kai reads the severity score and hits the highest numbers first. Kim says the score alone is a trap, and you fix what is actually being attacked right now. They both hold real ground here, and the standards do settle it, so make your cases.
Severity is the obvious anchor, and it is objective. Every vulnerability gets a CVSS score from 0 to 10. A 10.0, like Log4Shell, can hand an attacker your whole server, and a 4.3 is a minor information leak. If my hours are limited, I burn them on the 10s and the 9s first. Why would I ever fix a 4 before a 10?
That is a clean rule, and clean rules are easy to follow under real pressure. But Kim, the score is only one number. What is it leaving out?
It is leaving out reality. A CVSS score measures how bad a flaw could be in theory, not whether a single soul is exploiting it right now. There are thousands of 9 and 10 scored flaws no attacker ever bothered to weaponize. If I spend my whole week on a scary score nobody exploits, while a 6.5 that is being hammered across the internet today sits open, I optimized the wrong thing entirely.
So I should just ignore a 10.0 because it happens to be quiet today?
Not ignore, re-rank. There is a government list built for this exact problem, the CISA Known Exploited Vulnerabilities Catalog, the KEV. Every entry on it is confirmed exploited in the wild, so a flaw on the KEV jumps the queue no matter what its raw score says.
Alright, that is fair, and honestly the KEV solves my worst objection. I was treating the score as the whole answer. The catalog tells me which of my high scores are actually on fire versus just theoretically flammable.
Good, because the standards do not pick severity or exploitation, they combine them. And they add a third factor neither of you named yet, your own context. Whether the flawed system is even reachable in the first place.
Right? Mature vulnerability management ranks by 3 things together. The severity Kai trusts, the exploitation on the KEV list I trust, and exposure, whether the system is internet-facing or buried deep inside. A 10.0 on an isolated lab box is genuinely less urgent than a 7 on your public login page.
So for the exam, Lewis, who actually wins when they force a single answer?
Here is the verdict, and you are both partly right. When a question forces one first action, and a vulnerability is listed on the CISA KEV catalog, exploitation wins. You patch that one first, because active exploitation outranks a higher theoretical score. That is the sourced rule the standards give you. But the mature program blends all 3, severity and exploitation and exposure, weighed together. So the CVSS score is your starting point, never the finish line. You read the score, you check the KEV, you weigh your own exposure, and only then do you spend your few precious hours. That is vulnerability management, and it is exactly where this series turns next.
Now to the device in your pocket, because Objective 2.3 carries a whole mobile section, and it centers on two words people throw around casually and the exam tests carefully: sideloading and jailbreaking. They sound like cousins, they are not the same thing, and mixing them up costs you points.
Start with sideloading because it is the gentler of the two. Your phone normally installs apps only from the official store, where they are at least screened for the obvious threats. Sideloading means installing an app from somewhere else entirely. A file you downloaded, a link a friend sent, a random third-party store. You step right around the screening.
And I want to show what that bypass actually looks like on a test device I own in a lab, because seeing the warning makes it stick for good. When you sideload, the system itself tells you plainly that you are leaving the safe path. Watch the install run from the command line and notice exactly what it has to override. Read that middle line. The system says the app was not verified and it installs anyway because the user told it to, and that right there is the whole vulnerability. SID loading does not break the phone. It bypasses the one checkpoint that screens for malware. A fake free coins app is exactly how spyware reaches a device that was otherwise locked down.
Jailbreaking is the heavier one, and the exam draws a hard line here. Jailbreaking, sometimes called rooting on Android, removes the manufacturer's built-in restrictions entirely. It is not about one app at all. It tears down the walls the operating system uses to keep apps separated and to protect the core system from being modified.
So hold the distinction the exam rewards. Sideloading installs one app around the store, while jailbreaking dismantles the device's entire security model so any app can do anything it wants. A jailbroken phone has thrown away its sandbox, its update protections, its guarantees. It is the difference between sneaking one guest past the doorman and firing the doorman and removing all the locks.
So Kim, settle the honest question for someone watching who jailbreaks their own phone just for the freedom of it. Is it always the wrong call, or is there a real case for it?
Fair and honest answer, because there is a real fork here. For a hobbyist tinkering on a spare device they keep off every sensitive account, the freedom can absolutely be worth it, and that is a legitimate choice. But for the phone holding your banking, your work email, your two-factor codes, the exam and reality fully agree the risk is not worth the customization. Match the decision to what the device actually carries.
That is exactly the honest frame. Now let me close the objective with the family that quietly ties this entire episode together. Supply chain. You inherit the vulnerabilities of everything and everyone you choose to trust. Log4Shell was a supply chain problem at its heart. A flaw in one free component that thousands of companies pulled in without ever inspecting it. You did not write the bad code, but it shipped inside your product, and the moment it broke, it became your breach and your headline. That is the family the modern internet fears most.
So that completes Objective 2.3. Application, operating system, web, hardware, virtualization, cloud, supply chain, cryptographic, misconfiguration, mobile, and 0-day. 11 families, and you now have a real story or a live demo attached to the ones the exam leans on the hardest.
And here is how you survive the one you cannot see coming. Remember that community question from the top. If a 0-day has no patch, how do you defend against it? You do not defend the flaw, you defend the blast radius. You lean on segmentation and least privilege and constant monitoring. And you patch everything you can so the unknown flaw meets a hardened target instead of an open one.
That is defense in depth, and it is why naming the family matters. Once you can locate a flaw on our map, you know which control actually contains it, and no single unknown can take the whole building down.
So carry one idea out of here above all the rest. Almost every vulnerability on this objective comes down to a single truth: a trusted boundary failed. It is the wall between machines. It is the line between data and code, the screening on your phone, or the patch that never arrived. Find the boundary, ask how it could fail, and you can name anything the exam throws at you. Let us lock in the one idea that carries this whole objective. A 0-day is the famous one, but misconfiguration is the common one, and almost every family on the list comes down to that single truth: a trusted boundary failed. name where the flaw lives, and the family names itself.
Carry the clean distinctions into the exam. VM escape breaks out. Resource reuse leaves leftovers behind. End of life means no patches forever. Legacy just means old. Sideloading installs around the store. Jailbreaking tears down the walls. And when a flaw sits on the CISA KEV catalog, active exploitation outranks a scary score every single time.
And the win for you is concrete, and you can claim it tonight. Take any cloud account you have, open the storage permissions, and confirm nothing is public that should be private. Then append /.git/config to a site you run and make sure it returns nothing at all. In 5 minutes, you just close the 2 most common misconfigurations on the entire internet.
Next time we turn this whole list into a hunt. Vulnerability management is where you scan for these flaws and read their CVSS scores. You check each one against the KEV and then decide what to fix first. Everything we named today becomes a finding you have to triage, and that is where the workflow finally clicks into place.
If this finally made the vulnerability types make sense, subscribe and stay with the series, because we are building the One Security Plus playlist where you watch every concept happen in a real terminal, instead of just reading about it. Free practice questions live at certs.professorerica.com. Here is the one we want from you. Of all 11 vulnerability types we covered today, which one do you think is silently sitting in your own systems right now? Tell us in the comments. Perspective is cheap insurance. Keep some. See you next time.
Lewis, that was the kind of teaching I usually charge for. 9 out of 10. This is Professor Erica. Thanks for watching and signing off.